In another recording in this module, I said that research literacy is about the power of knowledge and how you can increase your power to turn information into knowledge. Another way to think about research literacy is that it's about being a savvy skeptic. Being a skeptic means you question or doubt, and being savvy means that you're knowledgeable. So, being a savvy skeptic includes using knowledge about a topic to pose questions or to raise doubts. That's an important part of what you'll be learning in this class. The textbook explains 6 questions we can ask when we encounter a claim, and those questions are a good starting point for our work in this class. As a side note, the opening of the related section of the book and the summary table both include a 7th question about measurement validity. It's not included in the longer explanation in the text though, and it's a little more complicated than the others, so we'll talk about that concept in another module. Okay, I might be showing my age, but the idea behind the first question reminds me of a Wendy's advertising campaign in the 80s that featured the question, "Where's the beef?" Like that ad campaign, this question is asking about the substance of a claim. In this case, though, substance comes in the form of evidence, referred to as data when we're talking about research. In the case of information, though, we don't just ask if there's data, but whether the data actually supports the claims being made. As the book explains, someone who's trying to convince us that their claim is true might use technical language and other persuasion strategies that suggest the supporting data is more credible than it actually is. Even when there's data related to a claim, though, we need to ask whether the overall idea is based on faulty assumptions. The examples in the textbook illustrate 2 ways that the assumptions come into play, though they're not the only way. The example related to school violence helps us think about what sticks in our mind and what doesn't. The technical term the authors use for that is the availability heuristic, which is when we think of information that's most available in our memory or the most obvious. There are a number of reasons that can lead to faulty assumptions. Aside from the fact that we each have different experiences, and that means the available information is different for each of us, the media plays a large role in emphasizing the most sensational events and covering them extensively. That makes them seem more sensational than they are. That relates to this author's example about school violence. The other example in the text is about estimates of birds flying into windows. It's a section labeled "The Anecdote." That illustrates how assumptions about the consistency of situations can lead to inaccurate claims. This question is a little more tricky, as the examples in the book suggest. The authors say that one way to avoid accepting claims that don't make sense is to look carefully at shocking numbers. I might be showing my cynicism, but my first thought was, there isn't much of anything that shocks me at this point. Another thing the authors suggest is that we can ask ourselves whether the finding or the claim fits with what we know about the world. But as culturally competent critical thinkers, we know there's probably a lot we don't know about the world, so that might not be such a good gauge. So now I've sort of trashed the author's perspective. What can we take away from this idea? The examples in the book help us think about the importance of understanding research methods and questioning what we call secondary sources, which you'll learn about in the next module. As I was thinking about this, I got a marketing email that also helped me put it in perspective. The subject line was, "Did you know there are over 7,848,985,014 personalities in the world?" Well, that shocked me, since I'm not familiar with any model of personality that would have that many categories. And then I realized they were using the idea of personality different than I'm used to, and I'm used to the way we define it in psychology. The email was using it to refer to the fact that each person on Earth is unique, whereas psychology defines it in terms of the models that specify characteristics and the degree to which each individual has those characteristics. While the way we're talking about the differences between people generally makes sense, using numbers makes it seem more systematic, more scientific than it can really be sometimes. Those are the types of situations when we want to practice savvy skepticism. In this case, they were just trying to sell a $20 activity to help couples get to know each other better. But there are times that presenting an idea about differences that is not based on science could create problems. This probably isn't the first time you've heard about the importance of questioning the source of data or the suggestion that there can be an agenda. Even as many times as I've heard it, it's a little unnerving to realize that the bias in the agenda isn't always as obvious as it might seem. The examples in the book about the marijuana pamphlets link back to something I mentioned in another recording in this module. Each study is part of a larger picture of accumulated evidence. That means, though, that it's often possible to cherry pick certain studies to support a particular point or agenda. At the superficial level, though, it might seem perfectly credible. It's based on research evidence, right? Along with that, we can question the actual studies being referenced. Chapter 1 of the text mentions that biomedical research funded by a corporation is more likely to show significant findings in favor of the finding company. That finding was from 1999, though. I haven't done any follow-up to know for sure. My instinct, though, is that changes in the standards for research ethics might mean that more recent studies are less likely to show that pattern. At the same time, some of the technical innovations that make it easier to spot bias like that also seem to be adding to the number of less credible research studies, a topic we'll learn about in the next module. Sometimes we'll also encounter studies that are credible in all ways, but have little meaning in what we might call real life. The book illustrates this by explaining a study designed to test whether a particular gene caused variations in aggression. This is one where the level of aggression was measured in terms of the amount of hot sauce a participant gave another person when the other person took the participant's winnings from a game. The authors point out a number of reasons that the finding isn't particularly credible in real life. One way to think about it is that the experiments in the lab are often oversimplified. Another consideration is what we call effect size in statistics. And basically, the effect size explains how much one of the variables influences the findings. If the effect size is small and the study focuses on one variable, it's probably not very meaningful outside of the lab. Behavior and mental processes are complex, so focusing on one variable is artificial in and of itself. But if that one variable doesn't actually influence much, Okay, so that explanation got a little technical. How does this relate to day-to-day life? When we ask, will the results survive the trip from the lab to the outside world, what we're really asking is, will that really happen in day-to-day life for most people? It's sort of like when you watch a TV show or a movie and think, that wouldn't really happen. Sometimes it's because the show or movie combines things that might happen if the experiences and fantasies of several people were combined. Sometimes it's just because it makes for a good show. Either way, it sort of resembles real life, but it probably wouldn't happen that way for many people. In those cases, the show or the movie would be like the lab, and day-to-day life for most people would be like the outside world. The last question in the book is there another way to explain the results? In some ways, this is another way to say, remember, it's complex, which, as you're probably already gathering, is a common refrain in research when people are involved. This is also a reminder, though, of the difference between data, information, and knowledge. Data can be analyzed in a number of ways, leading to an abundance of information. Interpreting that information contributes to knowledge. We encounter a lot of data and information that's presented as knowledge, which is part of the reason it's important to be a savvy skeptic. Each of the questions suggested in this recording and the related readings help confirm or debunk a piece of knowledge. We'll learn more about the related research concepts and methods in future modules. For now, though, knowing what to ask is as important as how to figure out the answer. These questions help us think about the support for a claim, in other words, the importance of data or evidence. At the same time, they remind us to think about the process of interpreting that data, the assumptions it represents, the potential agenda, and the context. The context relates to whether we try to use lab studies to explain complicated real-world situations and also influences the potential explanations for the results. That context may be one reason that a claim doesn't seem to make sense. But there are other reasons that research related to a claim might be strong and used to support a claim that still doesn't make sense. We'll learn more about one of those reasons in future modules.